A person is lying on a couch at 11 at night, phone held above their face, and on the screen is a photograph of a beach at sunset with 13 words written across it in soft white letters. The thumb hovers. Then it swipes up, and the words are gone. They are not reading it. They are not praying it. They are collecting it. One more calm-looking square dropped into a folder full of calm-looking squares, saved for people who are tired, people who are afraid of tomorrow, people who lie awake running the same fear in a loop and reach for something, anything, that looks like it might turn the noise off. 13 words over a beach photo, screenshotted, saved, and forgotten by morning. And those 13 words happen to be one of the most quoted lines about fear ever written. A sentence that has been printed on coffee mugs and hospital cards and the inside covers of 1 million journals, handed to people in the worst week of their lives as if the words themselves were a kind of medicine. 2 verses. That is all most people ever read. 2 verses lifted clean out of a letter that runs 104 verses long, cut away from everything around them, floated over an ocean that has nothing to do with where they came from. Because here is the part the beach photo leaves out. The man who wrote those words was not on a beach. He was in a rented room, chained by the wrist to a Roman soldier, waiting on a verdict that could end with his execution, and it eventually did. He never got out. He wrote the calmest words about anxiety in human history while he was in custody, and he never walked free again. Screenshotting that verse without the cell it came from is like saving a photo of a meal and thinking you have eaten. The words only do what they promise once you can see the room they were written in. So that is what we are going to do. We are going to read this the way the town of Philippi first heard it, out loud, all the way to the end of the line, in the setting that gives it its power. Let us start with where the words came from. The words came from a rented room in Rome, not a monastery, not a quiet study with a window over a garden, a rented apartment in the loudest city in the world. And the man writing was not free to leave it. He was a prisoner. Roman law called his situation free custody, which sounds gentle until you learn what it meant in practice. Luke records it plainly in Acts chapter 28, verse 16. Paul was allowed to live by himself, with a soldier to guard him. It meant he paid his own rent and could receive visitors, yes. It also meant a short length of iron ran from his wrist to the wrist of a soldier, 2 or 3 feet of chain, close enough that the guard heard every word he spoke and every prayer he prayed. And the guard changed. According to the Jewish historian Josephus, a watch like this ran in 4-hour shifts, which means a new soldier was clamped to him several times a day, every day, for 2 years. He wrote in chapter 1, verse 13, "It has become clear throughout the whole palace guard that I am in chains for Christ." He was chained to the empire's own elite bodyguard, and at the end of the same letter he sends greetings from those of Caesar's household. The man was writing from inside the machine that could kill him, and it might. This was not a comfortable wait for paperwork. He was awaiting a verdict from the emperor, and the emperor at that time was Nero. A guilty ruling did not mean a fine, it meant a sword. When he writes elsewhere in this same letter, "For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain," he is not being poetic, he is doing math on his own execution. Now, here is where an honest guide has to slow down. We do not know for certain which imprisonment produced this letter. Most scholars place it in Rome around the year 61. Some argue for an earlier jailing in Caesarea a few years before that. A minority make a case for Ephesus. The dating is genuinely disputed, and anyone who tells you the exact month is selling you something. But notice what is not disputed. In every single one of those theories, the man is a prisoner. Whether the chain was in Rome or Caesarea or Ephesus, whether the year was 58 or 61, the hand that wrote, "Do not be anxious about anything," was a hand with iron around the wrist. The address is uncertain, the chains are not. So sit with that for a second, because it changes everything about the beach photo. The most quoted verse about calm in the English language was not written by a man whose life was calm. It was written by a man who had every earthly reason to panic, no release date, a hostile emperor, a possible execution, and who picked up a pen anyway and told a church 3 weeks' travel away to stop being afraid. That is either the cruelest thing you could say to anxious people, or it is the only thing worth saying. Everything depends on what he tells them to do next. Now look at what the verse actually tells you to do. Because most people who screenshot it read it as a description. They hear "do not be anxious about anything" as if it were a gentle observation, as if Paul were saying, "Wouldn't it be nice if you felt calm?" But that is not the grammar of the sentence. It is a command, and it comes attached to instructions. Read the whole thing, chapter 4, verse 6. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Look at how much of that sentence is a verb. Pray, ask, give thanks, make it known. The verse does not say relax. It says do these specific things with the specific fear you are carrying, and it does not start there. 2 lines earlier, in verse 4, he plants the anchor the whole passage hangs from. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. He says it twice on purpose because he knows how it sounds coming from a man in chains. Then verse 5, one short line that most people skip right over. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. That is the ground the anxiety verse stands on. Not the Lord will fix this. Not the Lord will get you out. Just the Lord is near. He is close. He is in the room. Start there, and only then does verse 6 make any sense. So what do you actually do with a fear? He tells you, and the key is in one small word, everything. In everything, by prayer, let your requests be made known. Not your anxiety in the abstract, the actual thing. Here's what that looks like in practice. It is 2 a.m. and you are staring at the ceiling, and the fear is not some vague cloud called worry. It is a specific thing with a name. It is the biopsy result you are waiting on. It is the number in the account and the rent due Friday. It is the phone call you have been dreading for a week. Paul's instruction is to take that exact thing, the named one, the one with edges, and hand it over, out loud, on purpose. Most of us never do. We carry the whole gray mass of dread and never once set down the single thing underneath it. He is telling you to name it and pass it. And then comes the strange part, with thanksgiving. Gratitude in the same breath as the request, before a single thing has changed. Why would you thank someone before the help has even arrived? Because thanking someone before they have fixed anything moves your eyes off the size of the problem and onto the size of the one you are handing it to. Think about being in a small boat in rough water. As long as your eyes are locked on the wave rising over the side, you are done. The fear owns you. Thanksgiving is the deliberate act of turning your head away from the wave toward the person in the boat. With you who has crossed this water before, the wave does not get 1 inch smaller, but you are no longer facing it alone, and that changes what the wave can do to you. This is not a new idea Paul invented in a cell. It is the exact thing his own Lord taught on a hillside in Galilee years earlier. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 34, he said, "Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself." Paul is not writing self-help. He is passing down the medicine that was handed to him. And now watch what he promises in return, because this is where almost everyone reads it wrong. Verse 7. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Most people hear that word guard, and their mind quietly swaps it for something softer. They hear God will calm me down, God will smooth this over, God will make the hard feeling go away. But that is not what the word says. It says nothing about the feeling going away. It says a guard will be posted. And a guard is not what you set over a place that is safe. A guard is what you set over a place that is under threat. The promise is not that the war ends. The promise is that something stands watch over you while it is still going on. Which brings us to the single word this entire verse turns on. But before we get there, look back at what we have already walked through. A man in chains, writing to frighten people, telling them the cure for fear is not a feeling but an action. Hand over the specific thing. Do it with thanks. And expect not the end of the storm, but a guard posted in it. If seeing these verses in the setting they were actually written in is helping you read them differently than you did before, that is exactly what this channel exists to do. So subscribe, and leave a comment telling me which verse you have been reading the short way. Now, that word, everything turns on one word. In verse 7, the word we read as guard comes straight out of a soldier's vocabulary. And it is not a soft word. It means to stand sentry, to garrison, to post an armed watch over a fortified position. It is the word you would use for the troops stationed on a city wall through the night, spear in hand, watchfire burning, eyes fixed on the dark beyond the gate. He says it in full. The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. That is the picture Paul reaches for when he wants to tell frightened people what God's peace will do inside them. And here is why that word, of all words, would have landed like a hammer on the people reading it. Philippi was not just any town. It was a Roman colony, settled with veterans of the empire's wars after a famous battle fought on its own soil. It was a soldier's town. Half the old men in that church had served. The people opening this letter had watched Roman sentries patrol their walls their entire lives. They knew the sound of the night watch changing. They knew what it was to lie down and sleep, actually sleep, inside a city under threat. Not because the threat was gone, but because armed men they trusted were awake at the gate while they rested. So when Paul says the peace of God will guard your hearts, he is not handing them a vague, warm feeling. He is saying, you know that soldier on the wall who lets the whole town sleep? That is what God's peace does at the entrance to your mind. It stands there, it stays awake, and it turns the fear away at the door before it ever gets inside you. Sit with what that actually promises, because it is not what the beach photo promises. A guard on the wall does not mean the enemy is gone. It means the opposite. It means there is a real threat out there in the dark, and something stronger is standing between you and it. The peace of God is not the removal of the war. It is a sentry posted while the war is still on. That is why the verse calls it the peace that surpasses all understanding. It does not make sense on paper. By every rational calculation, the man writing it should have been a wreck. No release date, a hostile emperor, a sword hanging over the whole thing, and he is telling you there is a kind of guard that stands at the gate of a mind precisely when the situation gives you no natural reason to be calm. That is the whole point. A peace that made sense would not surpass understanding. This one does, because it shows up in the one place understanding says it should not. And this is exactly where people misread the most famous line in the whole letter. A few verses down, Paul writes the sentence you have seen on gym walls and locker room posters. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. People quote it before job interviews and championship games and final exams, as if it were a promise that God will help them win. But read the two verses right before it. I have learned, in whatever state I am, to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. He is walking through both, the full table and the empty one, and telling you he has learned to keep his feet in either. So the all things he can do is not landing the promotion or closing the deal or winning the game. It is surviving being brought low. It is holding steady when he has nothing left. That verse was never a slogan about achievement. It is a prisoner's line about endurance. I can get through anything, because someone stronger than me is holding the wall, which is a stunning thing for this particular man to write, because he had held that exact peace once before, under armed guard, in the dark, in a cell. And it happened in Philippi, in the very town now reading this letter. Paul had walked into Philippi for the first time around the year 50, years before this letter, on the journey that first carried the message into Europe. And the town's first believer was a woman named Lydia, a dealer in expensive purple cloth, who opened her home to him. Hold on to her for a moment. A businesswoman, a full house, an open door, because that is where this story is going to end. But it is not where it goes next, because it did not go well. Paul and his companion Silas freed a slave girl from a spirit that had made her owners rich, and the moment the money dried up, the owners dragged them into the marketplace. What happened next is written in the book of Acts, chapter 16. They were stripped in public. They were beaten with rods. Not a shove, not a warning, a flogging. The skin of their backs opened in front of a crowd. Then, verse 23, after they had been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. And he did. Verse 24, he put them in the inner cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. Picture it exactly. The innermost room of the jail, no light, no air. Two men with their backs torn open, their feet clamped into wooden blocks so they cannot even shift their weight to ease the pain. It is the middle of the night. By every human measure, this is the bottom. And here is verse 25. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them, singing, bleeding, clamped in the dark, at midnight, and singing, and notice who is listening. The other prisoners. Men who had surely heard every kind of sound a jail can produce, the cursing, the weeping, the bargaining, had never once heard that sound come out of that room. You cannot fake that. A man does not sing at the bottom of a jail because he is pretending. He sings because something is holding him that the stocks cannot reach. Then the ground moved. Verse 26. A violent earthquake, strong enough to shake the foundations, and at once all the prison doors flew open and everyone's chains came loose. This is the moment to run. This is the miracle escape, the doors standing open, the chains on the floor. And Paul does not move. The jailer wakes, sees the open doors, assumes his prisoners are gone, and draws his sword to kill himself. Because a Roman guard who loses his prisoners dies for it anyway, and he would rather do it by his own hand than wait for the shame. And out of the dark comes a voice. Verse 28, "Don't harm yourself. We are all here." The prisoner, still bleeding, with an open door 2 feet away, talks the jailer out of taking his own life. The man in chains is the calmest man in the building. And before the night is over, that jailer, the man who had locked the stocks, is on his knees asking Paul how to be saved, and his whole household is washed and baptized before sunrise. That is the same man who, roughly a decade later, in another cell, in another city, picks up a pen and writes, "Do not be anxious about anything." He is not writing theory. He is writing from the memory of a specific floor. He had already stood at the bottom of a jail with his back in ribbons and found that the guard held, that the piece showed up in the exact room where it made no sense. He knew the promise was real because he had already tested it in the worst place he had ever been. And now hold that picture next to something Paul wrote earlier in this very letter. In chapter 2, he describes his Lord, the one who, though he was God, emptied himself, took the form of a servant, and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Do you see what that means for the man in the cell? Paul can promise you peace at the bottom because he follows someone who went lower. When you are in the pit, you are not calling down to a God who has never been there. You are meeting the one who is already further down than you will ever go, who took the whole weight of it, all the way to a cross, so that no bottom you ever reach is a floor he has not already stood beneath. That is why the singing was possible. Not because the cell was not real, because someone had gone underneath it first. And then the letter arrived in Philippi. Picture that last scene. A man named Epaphroditus, who had carried the church's gift all the way to Rome and nearly died of illness doing it, walks back into Philippi with a single scroll under his arm. The church gathers. The same church that started in Lydia's house, in that open door we left a few minutes ago. Someone breaks the wax seal. And they begin to read aloud. In the town that had once stripped and beaten and jailed the very man whose words they are now hearing. The ink they are reading came out of a cell. It was written by a hand with iron around the wrist, and it is telling them, of all things, to stop being afraid, because that is what the man behind this letter was. He was not a calm man handed an easy life. He was not a free man writing from a garden. He was a chained man writing free words. And that gap between where his body was and what his pen said is the whole reason the verse has any power at all. Look at how he lands it. A few lines after the anxiety verse, he tells them what to fill their minds with. Whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is pure, think about these things. And then verse 9, he closes with a promise that is easy to miss. He does not say, "and you will feel peaceful." He says, "and the God of peace will be with you." Do you feel the shift? Back in verse 7, it was the peace of God standing guard. Now it is the God of peace himself. The sentry on the wall was never an it. The guard at the gate of your mind has a name and a face. Peace was never a feeling he was going to mail you from a distance. Peace was a person who promised to come and stand there himself. So what do you actually walk away with? 3 things. The first is simple, and it corrects the beach photo. The peace of this verse is not the absence of trouble. It is a guard set over your heart, while the trouble is still standing at the gate. That is why it surpasses understanding, because it shows up in the exact place your logic says peace has no business being. The second is about what you do tomorrow at 2 in the morning. The verse does not command you to feel calm. You cannot obey a feeling. It commands you to act, to take the one named thing, the biopsy, the bill, the call, and hand it over out loud, with thanks, before anything has changed. And the promise is that the guard shows up after you do that, not before. The peace follows the handing over. It does not lead it. And the third is the one this whole video was built to reach. The man who wrote, "Do not be anxious about anything," never got his circumstances fixed. Tradition tells us he was executed under Nero not long after, that he wrote the calmest words about fear ever put on paper, and then died in chains without ever walking free. Sit with what that means. If his peace had depended on his situation improving, this letter would be a lie, because his situation never improved. His peace was never wired to his circumstances. He had told them himself, back in chapter 1, verse 6, "He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. Not you will carry it, he will." And that is the gift hidden in the chains. Your peace was never meant to wait for your situation to change either, because his never did, and he had it anyway. The guard does not arrive when the trouble leaves. The guard arrives and stands while the trouble is still there. That is the whole promise. That is the thing the beach photo could never fit over a sunset. So the next time that verse slides past you over some ocean you have never seen, do not screenshot it. Read it to the end of the line, hear the chain behind it, and then do what it actually says. If this changed how you see even one verse you thought you already knew, subscribe, because that is exactly what we do here. We read them all the way to the end of the line. Take care of yourself, and go in peace.